Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Tuesday edition of The Talking Stick. I really appreciate you being here with me. I'm Jess, and I am the hostess of this channel. Today, we're going to talk about something that I feel is like kind of an ever-growing issue in our country, with everything, social media and all the different forms of the way that, people in the world find themselves, um, sort of like being accepted into society and actually succeeding through some of these, toxic traits that we actually discussed yesterday, but being held in like sort of a bundle that becomes, a real personality disorder. This disorder is called narcissism. Now, there are many types of narcissism that we will go over today. And again, just because someone falls into this doesn't necessarily mean that they have a personality disorder, but they can indeed be a narcissist without actually being diagnosed. So, I really wanted to go over this because I have, in my life, many times been taken by narcissists and, sort of been naive enough to believe their ploys and their plays and their love bombing and their trauma bonding and all the things that they do, the deflecting, the gaslighting. It is really something that becomes difficult to identify until you're right in the mix of it and you start to sort of pick it apart. Now, there are ways that you can handle these people and sort of, suss them out, you know. So, it's not like you can't, it's all a loss, right? It's not like just because someone's this way, you have to just itemize them out of your reality, but keeping them at arm's length is probably a good idea. They can be male or female, although it does seem to be predominantly male. So let's go. How many people in the world actually suffer? As far as diagnosed, it's, kind of 1 to 4% of the population, depending on where you are. But in the last decade alone, it has increased phenomenally. Now, what does this mean? It just means that, like, basically, in my opinion, these people really, you know, are glorified for what they are, stepping on people up the corporate ladder, not caring, being very self-centered as far as success is concerned, and being willing to do whatever it takes. But the patients with this disorder are typically male, with half to 3/4 being men. So like I was saying, it can be female, but, um, you know, there are females out there too. Studies estimate that around 17% of the general population are actually narcissists without being diagnosed as having a personality disorder. So I found that pretty, interesting. Um, you know, there are these extreme examples, and I literally just experienced one. And I actually realized that he was a narcissist and tried to talk to him about it, which, at first, like, he acted as though he was, like, available to that idea and it had never been presented to him before. And then I literally found out that he's been diagnosed twice as a sociopathic narcissist, which is like the worst kind. It's like, Jeffrey Dahmer, basically, type of personality. So it was a big loop and, long standing. There are long standing things that I will have to deal with because of his lies. So, it's definitely something that I would like to present to others to protect yourself from these people, or try to. So about 17% of all narcissists are these extreme types. Studies show that there are some lines of work where, narcissism may be more common. So the financial sector, politics, celebrities, and religious leaders. So particularly like cult leaders and stuff, right? So, and they think that this is because even to be those, to choose those lines of work, you have to have some level of like grandiosity or self, importance. So, but then it goes further, and there just seems to be a general disregard for others in that, personality. So, what the heck causes this, right? Where does this come from? Now, it's typically childhood, things that happen in childhood for people. And, you know, of course, children are naturally quite narcissistic. They don't really know any other way to be. And this enables them to, kind of get the care they need. And, so I wouldn't, this definitely is not something you look for in childhood, but it is something that is actually created mostly in childhood. So, yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. But, having a mother who is abusive or lacks empathy and is constantly criticizing her child, can cause it, as well as someone who, like, literally is like, no matter what you do, you're awesome. Oh, don't worry about those mistakes. It's okay. You're awesome. And doesn't really hold them accountable, right, for who they actually are, and makes them think that no matter what they do, they're great. So, let's sort of, go over that a little bit. The risk factors in early childhood include insensitive parenting, negligence, excessive criticism, abuse, trauma, extremely high expectations, or overpraise. Uh, you know, they're also, they're also looking at the idea of this, of the connection between like genetics and, different aspects of the brain that may also preclude someone to this. But that's still sort of being researched. So once the narcissist has you in their clutches, which they usually do by love bombing, a lot of them will intently listen to you in the beginning so that they can, like, basically pick up all their tools to control and understand who you are, so they know what angle to take as far as, controlling you. Now, that is really the bottom line. These people do not care how you feel. They are not at all concerned with your emotional health, physical health, your well-being, who you are, what you want. Nothing like that. At first, they're going to make you feel like you're the best thing since frickin' sliced bread. And they may even do something called trauma bonding. So first they'll try to love bomb, and then they'll, like, oh, I've had, these horrible things happen to me, and, really make you feel like you've got to, like, feel kind of sorry for them and give them a little extra and extra love and a little extra patience and all that stuff because of their horrible and traumatic past. Now, I'm not saying that those horrible and traumatic pasts didn't happen, but they almost use that as a tool to bond with you and make you feel like they've become vulnerable with you and trust you and all this. So once they got that nailed, they start to become manipulative. Things begin to change. I know for me, in the relationship that I was in, it was like, I just kept thinking, what changed? Everything was so great in the beginning, in the first few months. And then, of course, you think, oh, well, I guess the honeymoon period wears off. People get to know each other, and these types of things happen. But, I don't know how much truth, there is to that. So, I mean, that is true. There is an element of the honeymoon period that does wear off for everyone, I'd say. But then, this is more extreme. This is like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type stuff. And it, can start as being very subtle. You start to doubt yourself and feel confused. And I remember constantly being like, I feel confused. And, they gaslight you to make you feel as though you're the problem. And, they'll even tell you you're the narcissist, which, happened. And, like I said before, that's one of the reasons I brought up the toxic traits, because then you start to evaluate yourself. You start to look at anything of yourself that may be toxic, and try to understand how to be better and things like that, because, you think you love the person and you don't, want them to feel this way. But in reality, they are gaslighting, which is where you take a situation and kind of turn it. That's a little bit different than deflection, which they also use, which is basically trying to say that everything is on everyone else but them, deflecting responsibility for their actions. But when you're dealing with the gaslighter, they'll often, spin it, so fast, your head's spinning too. It's like, it's like when someone slams the door in your face in some ways, and like, it's like the wind just blows your hair back, and you're just like, whoa, what just happened? And so you might bring something to the table that maybe you're uncomfortable with that they're doing or something like that. And then suddenly it's all about you. It's your fault. They've turned it all around, So, just be aware of that. So you'll even start to be like, oh, it's just because their mom was really mean to them and they don't understand, relationships. And you start to give a lot more than you really would or want to or should, really. But, again, it's like suddenly, they make you feel like you're not good enough with these subtle comments. They will definitely do that whole, like, joke around about you. Like, for me, they did it in front of my family, like these jokes that were really demeaning but phrased as a joke. You start to sort of wanting to walk on eggshells, or you know bring your personality to a sort of real subtle version of itself to keep from getting attacked by these people. And trying to appease them, especially because it's just so confusing, because at first he's like, you're such a unicorn, you're everything I've ever wanted, la, la, la. And then suddenly he hates hippies, which he obviously identified me with that you know um, stereotype, and then would say, oh, I hate all hippies, but now I'm in love with one. And I'm just like, how does that work? And I started to say, like, I don't think you really like me that much. And he'd be like, why would I even be with you if I didn't like you? And like all this. So it's really confusing is like the best way to put it. And it's like pretty abusive, honestly, but it's like not abusive in like the way, like, a lot of narcissists, not all, but a lot of them will not do the things that they would actually show straight up that they're in the wrong. Like, they're not going to be usually hitting you or breaking things, although some of them do. Now, I'm not saying that's not possible. Some of them do, but a lot of them are very much, they run a line to confuse you, and doing something that outright would be pretty much putting all the blame on them, which is something they cannot and will not stand for, even though a lot of times most of the blame is on them. So the big one was lack of empathy. And of course, again, being blamed on childhood. And, oh, when I was little, I wasn't allowed to cry. And, oh, I have to leave the room when people are crying because I just don't know what to say. I mean, he even blatantly said, I don't have empathy. And, like, of course, I wasn't as abreast as I am now on this. As through the relationship, I started really researching narcissism, because I did identify enough in him to say, I think this person might be a narcissist. But of course, they really do try to make you feel crazy. So he was blaming my grief, my past relationships, anything he could on my thought process, instead of just owning it, right? So they have a lot of shame. They do have some awareness of what they're doing to others. And of course, without the lack of empathy, it's not really that they're shameful about that. They're just sort of ashamed of themselves overall, And so this is all like a big front to sort of negate that feeling. So they can present very differently with each other. Again, that's the part that can be so confusing, right? So let's go over the types. There are main types and then subtypes. So, um, that makes it even more confusing. So I do encourage you, there's lots of info, lots of literature online about this. And, it is dangerous. It is a dangerous experience for your own self, for your health, for your, physical, mental, everything, depending on what this person decides to do to control you or the situation, right? So the classic narcissist is one that we're all pretty familiar with. They're like the person who just thinks they're the best at everything. They're very high functioning. They're very successful. They expect everyone to sort of kiss their feet. They think they could run the world, literally, and that they should be, and that anyone who is in those positions just aren't good enough. So, you know, it's definitely, they always are, like, he used to do things like, he literally told me that the grief I was experiencing was nothing like he'd ever seen, and it wasn't grief, it was bipolar. And I'm like, I'm not bipolar. But, he'd also say that, like, his drug addict daughter, who was, like, become an addict and is homeless and on the streets now, was, like, the same as my daughter passing away. And negate my grief and say, oh, well, I don't feel that way. I don't act that way. And I have grief. I've lost people and, all these things, just sort of, working to negate you and anything that you might have that gives you something that they don't or whatever. So I actually thought he was a vulnerable narcissist at first. That's the next type. They actually present differently. They're the trauma bonders. They're the woe is me type people. And, so they attach themselves to special people instead of, seeking the special treatment of themselves. So what they'll do is find someone who has something special about themselves or that they think seems different and really, want to fall into the shadow of that person in some ways and get pity and, be excessively generous. And I didn't see that in him, but they're just trying to basically boost self-worth. This is the type of person that does, a lot of times it's abuse and trauma that kind of creates this person. So instead of just healing and becoming something greater themselves, they tend to attach to people who have that drive, right? But really, I mean, it's definitely still pretty obvious. There's still the gaslighting. There's still a lot of the same stuff going on, right? So the next one is called a communal narcissist. So this one's pretty, tricky as well. It's like they basically are, again, like it's itemizing that, where they really listen and sort of prey upon your passions, right? So say you are passionate about the homeless. If they are wanting to get into your graces and sort of loop you in, they will go and work at a, like, homeless shelter or feed the hungry or make the sandwiches and bring them out to the homeless people or whatever, and really go in on those things that they see that you care about. And they think that, they want to join you and change the world and all this, and they'll say all that stuff. But really, once you get in with them and they think they have you looped, that stuff sort of wanes to the side and it becomes, more about them. And, but you will also notice that with this type, they don't really have that grandiose sense of self. They sort of mimic into whatever the person that they want to become their new source, which is what they call the person who's being taken on a loop with these narcissists. They become a source of energy, a source of focus. Because again, these people don't really have their own, sense of self and purpose, right? So they use others for that. They use others to feel that way. Now, the one I just dealt with ended up being this malignant narcissist, which, is very toxic, exploit others. He was very paranoid and antisocial, in a lot of different ways. But again, he attributed that to his trauma of childhood, which was the most extreme stories I've ever heard about traumatic childhood. Put the movie Precious to shame, and in a sense of just being so intense. I couldn't even imagine how someone could make up that type of stuff, unless they experienced it. He was very deceitful, very aggressive, and had no remorse for anything he ever did to hurt anyone else, his animal. He would even talk poorly about children, and I remember being like, who does that? So the subtypes, there's, I don't want to go too far into all this because it does get quite confusing. So some of these are covert and some of these are overt. So it'll be variant. The vulnerable narcissist, for example, is a covert narcissist. So it's not something you're going to actually think right away because it doesn't fall into those typical traits. And then there's the overt ones who, are really easy to identify. So there's also, the somatic versus cerebral. So, some of these will also be very much one way or the other. So their grandiosity is based on their intelligence, or the fact that they go to the gym every day and work hard and have this great body that everybody else wants, so it usually falls, one way or the other. And again, this diversifies the way these people can present themselves. So this sadistic, this is what this cat was, this sadistic narcissist. And I'm telling you, it was literally the worst form of narcissist available to man. And I had an 8-month experience with one. So, they're very codependent, and they like to attach themselves to others to feel special. They have a very victim mindset and suffer from child abandonment issues. So, just literally him. And, so that's part of this inverted sadistic, right? So, again, it's not forthcoming in a lot of ways, but the sadistic one is a sociopathic, can also be called sociopathic or psychopathic or both, because you can be somewhat a bit of both. They take great pleasure in others' pain. One time the tweakers behind us, blew up their place, and it seemed like it was a chemical fire, or due to them cooking meth or something. And he was so excited and happy about it. It was so weird. He didn't even want to call authorities. And I was like, what in the heck are you talking about? Yes, we're calling authorities. There's a fire. People could be hurt. And it was just a really weird thing, and, humiliating and hurting people. That's something he definitely did. Like I was describing, he did it to me and to others, and literally had no regard for it. Just, again, gaslighting and deflection, put it on everybody else's plate but his. And so bizarre sexual fetishes and perspectives is also part of that. So yeah, it's definitely can be very scary. Now, there are plenty of YouTube channels out there that really discuss this and go very, very deep. Dr. Romney is one of my favorites. She has literally devoted her entire channel and discussion to all the different ways that narcissists can affect us, and situations and giving tools. Now, that's one of the ways I really realized that this person was like dangerous is I was watching Dr. Romney and using some of her tools, and they were, very effective, right? So, like, there's one like stonewalling, like you don't give an emotional reaction because that is what they are looking for. They're looking for you to give an emotional reaction. They'll often do something called, reactive abuse, where they will, figure out your little quirks and the things you don't really like and poke subtly at you until finally you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't deal with this or whatever. And then they try to act like you're crazy. They definitely go and do smear campaigns against you to your family and friends. It was, this cat actually successfully smeared me to a friend, and she believed him, and now she's not my friend. So that's okay with me. Sussed her out, I guess, but really it's nothing I would ever want to be involved with. There's even people who are like, there's other subtypes like sexual narcissists who use their sexual prowess or ability to have sex with many people and have many people want to do that be something that they then are, as a way that they express their narcissism. And that's a very dangerous one. And again, people can be many of these at once. So please be aware, okay? This is a dangerous situation. They prey on the vulnerable. So for me, being in my grief, I feel like that's pretty much what, he was preying upon me. And it was definitely an experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone, okay? So I am healing and growing and moving on from it, but no, it's not something I would ever wish upon anyone. So stay aware. It is a growing issue in our country, and these people lie, they cheat, they do all kinds of things with no regard. They will spend your money, they will take everything. So please be aware, and then by the time you figure it all out, there's a level of depletion that you've got to heal from. So be aware. They tend to prey on the golden hearts too, because the empaths, the people who really do care about humanity and are willing to understand people for what their hurt is and their history and all of that. And he even had like a type, for hating hippies, like dating all women who do massage and these things that he says he hates. And he ended up being a closet meth user, which is why he hated the meth heads behind us. You know what I mean? So be on the lookout for that, because they'll often really talk a lot of negative things about who they really are because of their own shame. So yeah, and anytime you call them out, they're going to shame you to all ends of the earth to deflect from the fact that you're correct. They'll make you feel crazy and everything. So like I said, please be careful out there. This is just something. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but this is my own. I have had the experience. If you feel like you are in one of these situations, there are some like resources, and do your best to just get away from it as soon as you can. They can become dangerous. I had to get security and a gun and all this. They can become dangerous when you finally figure them out. So definitely, take care of yourself first. Okay, so that's about the wrap on that. I appreciate you sticking here, and I hope this helps you in some way if you have maybe thought you were in this type of relationship, or even if you were not even aware. I hope it helped you if you do find yourself, or maybe giving you a clue to what might be happening around you if you feel confused and someone's making you feel like you're crazy and all these things. Definitely question who that person is. They lie about their past for sure. I used to get threatened if I looked into his past at all. I'd be, he would threaten me. So, yeah, I won't go any further, but again, thanks so much for being here and being willing to talk about maybe some uncomfortable subjects, but it's all about just being willing to learn, to show up to learn so that we may grow and glow into our greatest selves here on earth. Okay? All right, too. I will be back tomorrow, and tomorrow I'm actually going to talk a little bit about Thanksgiving and just let's talk about the fact that it wasn't necessarily a happy thing, even though we do celebrate it as in a sense of just gratitude for each other these days. But yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then I will not be here for Thanksgiving Day, but then on Friday we will talk about the history of Black Friday. So a little bit more fun topics. Tomorrow's isn't totally fun, but you know, I find it a little bit interesting and, good to know the truth here, right? So, all right, everyone. Again, please, if you like this, please like, please share, please subscribe. I appreciate it so much, so that we can get more and more people coming to the table with us to, discuss all these different things that surround just being human. All right. Well, again, I will see you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.